So this evening's Dharma talk will be given from our house. This is my studio, and I brought in a friend who came from China some time ago, where he was created. Title of the talk is The Ignored Frontier. So the idea there is to endeavor to point to the consciousness where nothing particular is arising or is known, and we need to spend quite a bit of time going through the furniture of our personal mind, through the stumps and logs and bumps and rocks and rivers and mountains and so on. Mm-hmm. And we need to do that with some vigilance and some persistence. That's difficult because quite often we run into signs, or at least we interpret those signs as this is not right. This is not helping. You're not making any progress here. All we see is more mountains and valleys, or more bumps, or more underbrush. Nothing happening here. Or perhaps what is happening is very, very disagreeable. And sometimes a word for this, sometimes in medicine, if we use something that is it seems to be against our overall health, it sometimes functions to invigorate us or keep us going. I think the word is, if I remember it correctly, is hormesis, which of course that works in some areas and not in others. You can't just do something negative and expect it to always produce good results. I think the Wim Hof approach of being immersed in cold water for a length of time is supposed to help the overall system in some way that I can't really describe particularly. Some of our monastery residents have done that kind of a practice. But the idea is that another way of saying it is a voluntary difficulty or suffering or dissatisfaction to go into that creates changes or attitudes towards the negativity that is arising that helps us see that we could actually face it. We could actually go into the negativity rather than get upset with it and try to run away or make excuses or blame, and so on and so forth. Basically, what shows up is a fear of the unknown. But it seems to be necessary to do this. Sit down, hold still, watch the mind until the spaciousness of the mind, which is unknown, which doesn't give us reference points, begins to show up. And then we create more problems if we grasp onto that apparent emptiness, openness, shunyata, however you would like to characterize it, and then we try to make it our own, make it our territory. And so this could be some kind of a spiral or circular rest area where we don't go any further. We just conclude our understanding in the form of concepts, ideas, judgments, opinions, concepts, conclusions, and so on. So what we are encouraged, what I've been encouraged to do, and I'm encouraging you to do, is to continue to go into that, to continue to go into the unknown, the empty open space of the mind, the consciousness that doesn't have a lot of trappings, doesn't have a lot of handholds, doesn't actually have a stairway, it doesn't have railings. I'm just using these images or metaphors to help you see, encourage you to go into that, go deeply into the nature of your mind. Find out who you are, is the way I say it over and over again. The various identities will keep showing up, popping up. And it is important to just continue to keep going. It seems to be important to do this, to come to any kind of natural or innate sanity that the that our consciousness is sometimes called Buddha nature, or Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, Nirmanakaya, or Svabhavikakaya, or the when those come together as just this. And when those come together as just this, even that is extra. That thus just thisness is just a way of talking about there isn't anything going on. There isn't anything happening. Everything that is moving away, moving towards, or standing still is not separate. So therefore, you could say that not much is going on there. We tend to impute or attribute or make up stories around everything to give us that feeling of what? Separation of somebody, some person who can get ahead, some person who fears falling behind. Sometimes when, depending on our style, when things go awry or get difficult, we tend to retreat into our particular way of shutting down. It could be characterized by ignorance, by passion, making excuses, just shutting down or distracting, which is ignorance, making excuses or blaming oneself or others, which is passion, and or aggression, just getting really irritated and upset and cranky. And that fills up the space with someone who is upset or cranky or mad. Anger, sometimes it goes so far that we need to make such a dent in our room or our yard or our life that we'll actually break things and try to show that we're really upset, show ourselves, show others, and so on. Yes.
Junshu has a question. When you say go into the unknown,
location aspect to it, because we're using the concept of unknown. So it seems to like it needs to be practiced to sit down by oneself and hold very still and turn one's attention towards the mind or towards the consciousness, which could be manifesting in terms of objects arising in any one of the six sense fields, including the mind, as thoughts, emotions, memories, and so on. And I say, the way I teach this is to just observe. Other forms, there are some forms that are very proactive, you could say, that go in and try to get you to calm down. To me, that's not that can't be done, can't be helpful. Been happening in the Tibetan traditions, all of the traditions, Shine and Laktang, or calm abiding, resting the mind in tranquility, and Vipassana, or panoramic awareness. So those things are workable, but the way we practice that here is, and the name is a Japanese word is shikantaza, or just precisely this, which is saying that everything you're looking for is here. It might show up initially as concepts, ideas, pronouncements, validations, and so on, judgments, and so on. But one needs to persist in looking at that, the movement there, and so it takes some stubbornness and persistence to do that, because it doesn't pay off. This is just getting worse.
Shoto has a question.
Shoto.
He asks, is karma the same as fate?
So I think the way fate is used is, we'll start with karma. The way karma is used is just action, cause and effect, cause and effect. This happens and that happens and this happens. And the material world that we're downloaded into, this human realm, if in fact that's where we're at, and we probably are if we're listening to this this Dharma talk, then action, reaction. And it's the idea is to observe that without letting any of it snag you. And you may have to see the way it snags you, the way in which you hang on, the way in which you grasp, the way in which you reject, which is another form of grasp, the way in which you shut down or distract yourself, which is another form of grasping, of wanting things to be different than they are. And so what the fate is, it's like saying, well, it's fate. It's like a resignation to, well, that's your karma. That would be using karma in the word in the same way that the word fate is used. Well, it's just your fate to be a a mindless wretch. You've been talking to yourself that way? It's just your fate to have that. It's just your fate to be president of the United States. Just your fate to be uh, end up in the penitentiary or something. That you're fated. It's not that there isn't something happening there. Of course there is. Otherwise, we would all have the same eye color. We would all have the same height. We would all say it wouldn't even be possible because their differentiation needs to occur in terms of independent people, animals, bugs, birds, clouds. Everything is coming out of dependent origination, which is very, very complicated. The complications there are so vast and extended that we don't even see them. It's like looking at a blur. It's like looking at the desert and just seeing each individual piece of sand. Pretty hard to do. What we see is what? A desert. And when we look at ourselves, what we see is me. We don't see all the little tiny pieces and particles that are not only here in this, in the way that it is evident, but also what has been going on forever that comes together in this particular manifestation in this apparent moment. So karma and fate, if you have further questions about it, I can look at that, but it seems like it's coming out of some other kind of understanding or misunderstanding. Karma is action. Fate is, sounds like predestination or something. Like it's predetermined. You have no say-so about it.
Do we have any say-so about karma?
We have some. Just like the one I'm always using is I have a say-so about whether I can put my hand here or put my hand on my knee. And if we think we're a body-mind complex, then it looks like we have all kinds of control. And it's just those other people that get in our way that keep us from making $1 million or keep us from doing this or that or the other thing or anything that we want to do. Something else gets in our way. So I have some. Very good to see how much, and one of the ways you can do that, probably one of the few ways you can do that, if not perhaps the only way, I don't know for sure, haven't looked at everything in the universe, is to hold very still and watch the impulsiveness of them, the perception impulse. Instead of just observing what arises, we abandon it for what we think it means, or we abandon it for how it makes us feel, or we abandon it for ice cream in the refrigerator, which is what I just did recently. Am I supposed to be eating ice cream?
Probably not.
Okay. It slips my mind sometimes. Yes.
Jinshu has another question. She asks, who has the say-so? You said that we have some say-so over karma. Who is that has that say-so?
So the who shows up as an individual that is trying to have a good life, trying to train their mind. There's a temporary identity that's functioning. But the more that temporary identity comes into doubt, the more we look for something deeper, something more that has some kind of grit to it, or some kind of, I don't know, substance, something that we want to trust, but we can't quite do that yet because we need to look further. We need to look more carefully, more closely. And this is what the Buddha Dharma is about. For 2,500 years, people stumble into this or run into this or led into this or are taught or are born into it, however. And then we begin to see this is a particularly good way of working with the mind, because it's not that there isn't a lot of control or manipulation going on in the politics of Buddhism. There isn't everything, but it is an opportunity for you to work with the mind in a very, very direct way where you can see yourself. You can train your mind to see clearly yourself. If you really understand what Buddhism is and what it teaches, Buddhism vanishes because it's just a path. And once you've understood that, or once the goal is reached, to use the literal way, there's no path yet, or no path left rather. Yet one continues to move further into that. But then the path is no longer a set of instructions or admonitions or corrections or any of that. More?
Ethan says hi.
Hey, Ethan. What up, yo?
Sokuzan has a question.
Okay.
She says, you mentioned Wim Hof as a practice of being with what is uncomfortable. Off the cushion, is it helpful to complement our sitting practice with something physically challenging or uncomfortable?
I think that would be up to you. I think, just like exercise doesn't feel very good and it is uncomfortable, but we build our muscles and we build up. We actually, you could say, get something out of it. And I know there's the interesting thing. I'm not sure what the investigation would turn up there, but there's the bands that you put around your biceps or your leg muscles, and then you exercise, and it tends to send some kind of a, because you're restricting it, sends some kind of a message to that. So that's something that it could be looked at. There's ways in which that works to somehow benefit us in different ways. And there's other ways where it may not work so well. Like there's controversy out there about if you had a little bit of alcohol, this would be good for your heart. But too much alcohol, of course, this is not so good. And I need not say more about that. So that the negative, positive, neutral, all of that kind of energy movement can be done through your awareness, through your intelligence, or through your own perception. But be careful about teaching anybody else about something unless you're really, really confident that what you're saying has a fundamental benefit to it. Sitting meditation does. And just its very nature is you stop doing stuff and you see what continues to move on. And this is the way you begin to understand the true nature of control, the true nature of authority, and the true nature of your consciousness.
Chisho from Houston.
Yes, Chisho.
He says, just to let you know that within the first 5 minutes, your talk sorted out a self-centered attitude that he was in this entire day. Thanks.
You're welcome, Mr. Wisdom Hammer.
And Shoka has a question. What is the path when it goes beyond forms or rules?
So to take the story that started there, you're on the path and you're noticing that the forms and the rules are beginning to subside, and yet there's still a path quality going on. Then I would say that's a path quality with no particular rules or forms. It's still a path. If it were completion, you wouldn't have the question. And so, to take that a little further, just to sit and not really have any questions doesn't mean you've come to fruition. And also, to see that there aren't any questions doesn't necessarily mean there's a problem either. Don't abandon anything that's happening for something else. Anytime you do that, circles.
What is the fruition on the path?
You actually see that anything you see, you're not separate from. You're not the same as that. So what was the 9th century Sandokai that we've been reciting in the morning, and I think the 3rd sutra that we chant is Sandokai by Sokuzan, middle of the 9th century somewhere. But they have sameness and difference. It's just a way of talking about the duality, that to show the way that the reason we're tricked is they look like two separate things. And the ego mind, the self-centered mind, the 7th consciousness, the cage of our afflictions, wants to use that right and wrong, up and down, back and forth, grasping structure to secure itself and continue to reify that identity. But the one who sees, if you see that it's both different and the same, then if you don't do anything with it, if you don't conclude, and if you don't do like that crazy SokukoJi did, write a poem about it, he just destroyed his whole enlightenment there. but he did it for us.
Sokuzan asks, does absolute clarity show up as relative clarity?
Both the idea of relative and absolute vanish. There is no other. It's empty of any otherness. So there can't be any contrast. That being said, if someone who understands this meets people who are having difficulty with passion, aggression, and ignorance, with pride and shame, and all the other 8 worldly dharmas, then with their permission, one who sees this can possibly help them if the chemistry, if the connection is right. Not always that is not always the case, and sometimes the person may see that, but may just not want to pursue it. It's just too much work. There's not enough really good gooey feedback. There's not enough nutrition for the for what they think is a wisdom mind, but actually is the ego. We need to starve the ego. So, not be mean. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about not eating or sitting on nails or torturing oneself with cold weather. Unless it's Wim Hof, of course, and you can do it a little bit. But it's a deliberate it's an elimination diet for the self-centered grasping mind. We don't give it much to grasp onto. Nor do we run away. So it leaves the self-centered mind, which is a sham, which is untrue, which is a mask, and which is a charade, and which is invented, and it needs. As Trungpa Rinpoche said, it's a paranoid insurance policy. It's a policy. We believe in this, so it's based on paranoia. On something's going to get us, something's going to get ahead, something's going to take us down. We're going to end up being wrong, and humiliated, and so on. More.
Another question.
Yes.
From Junshu. Is the ignored frontier out of our reach or out of reach of our awareness?
No. That frontier begins to show up as soon as you have the intention to see deeply into the truth, and you're sincere about it, and you're determined and persistent. And one of the ways to do this is just schedule yourself. Just keep coming back. And as they say, take your medicine. Say, keep coming back and looking at it with the encouragement of the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And so it's not, as far as out of our reach. The self-centered mind may dream that up or think that up with the idea of maybe I should just stop. I'm probably never going to get this. That's why it seems that vows are important there. It's hard to, once you do that, once you sincerely commit to that, you notice that's got a lot of glue in it. Not everyone should do that. I'm not here to market anything. But if you've done that, then you'll notice that seems to be helpful to stay with it. It can even show up as feeling guilty because you haven't been sitting. But if that guilt's going to show up about something. If you have it, then it's going to trigger something. You don't suddenly start feeling guilty just because you receive precepts. Just keep going.
Shuka has another question, and he might need to clarify.
Okay.
He asks, what is the unknown in the territory of having questions arise?
Ignorance. Vanilla, Ethan. I'm looking at the questions. Oh. And for Laura Rutkowski and Travers, recent sitting sessions, the wall is changing colors and shadows, like watching a show. How long will this go on? It doesn't matter. It may go on, it may not. It doesn't mean much. It's just filling up space with daydreams of various kinds. just watch, enjoy it, or be irritated by it. Whatever shows up with it, that's what it is. It could disappear and for 3 weeks and then suddenly come back. And what does that do? Generally, it creates all kinds of, what's that's going on? What am I doing? Am I sitting? Am I worried? Maybe I think I was wearing red socks during that time. That's probably what it is. Don't do it. Don't go anywhere with it. It's just phenomena coming and going, looking for a person, get upset or get happy or just somebody's trying to sell you something, and you know what it is. It's the seventh consciousness or the ego mind that is flooded with a kind of grasping that is very hard to root out. I don't know if you can root it out, but you can eventually see that it's unreal, and then it gets very ashamed of itself and tries to make up to you. I'm really sorry that I fooled you all these years, making you think that you were somebody who could fail. Now they're working on you're somebody who can succeed, which is even more fun. Go ahead.
So Shoka has clarified what is ignorance in the territory of not having questions arise.
So it could show up, be ignorance, as I said, but it can also be a pride in not wanting to, knowing that one's questions would. So we're not going to say them because we know that when we ask, anytime you ask a question, you begin to show how your mind works. So when you ask the question, then some people, even though you might think you're pretty fancy, other people are listening to what you're saying. They're noticing how nuts you are. Apparently she's entertained by that somehow. And when I say that, I don't mean they would be critical of you. They just notice that the way in which you are thinking, the way in which your mind comes to this and leaves that, or leaves that and comes to this, it shows the very nature of your confusion. Isn't it interesting how you can see other people's confusion so easily? Anybody you meet, it doesn't take long, you start to see the way in which they're deceiving themselves. I'm sure I'm obvious how I deceive myself. I've got everybody fooled, or some people fooled, that I'm somehow enlightened, or I'm a Buddhist monk or something. So. And Shoka's got everybody fooled into thinking that he doesn't have any questions.
Shoto has another question. With the clarity we see others' confusion.
So the clarity with which we see others' confusion is an imputation. You don't really see their lack of, it's a projection. You project onto them the confusion. They don't have the confusion you think they do, much to our surprise. Seems so real. We're not saying there isn't something there, but it's not as dense a network of thought patterns and conclusions and opinions and so on as it seems to be. What was the last half?
Can we see our own confusion with the clarity we see others' confusion?
I think that our own confusion starts to show up, might show up in the form of what we think of others. Start to look at our own dismay about our life and about what's happening. And if you can, I don't say stay with it, but just don't abandon it. Don't go away for something else, either through artificial means, drugs, activity. I'm just going to go and climb trees until this goes away. And it is, as you know, it's not that you couldn't do that. Of course you could. If life is really bad, go to a movie or go to go watch Groundhog Day or something, or go be a groundhog. Do something else. But if you can, don't do anything with it. If it's there may be one day where you actually can just not do anything with it, not even meditate. Just sit there and have the emotion that seems to be rising out of your footsteps, out of your tracks, out of your life right this moment. Because that's where the actual cover-up is taking place. or the um, modification of our identity in order to have some kind of feeling that we are someone.
Shuka has another question. He asks, is that deception in, quote, others, unquote, ours?
The deception we see in others?
Yes.
Yeah, it is.
So is that deception that we attribute to others?
It could become, yes, it's mirror like. That's what the uh, song of the Jewel Mirror Samadhi, the Hokyo's on Mai. That's basically what that's pointing to. And there's lots of teachings that talk about the mirror like nature. Yeah, the um, that wisdom is mirror like. It's everywhere you look, you see yourself. So you also see the way you deceive yourself and the way you buy into this and sell that and so on. And that, but the self-centered mind, it's looking for a credential to be somebody else. It wants to be a person who's not unhappy, who does not suffer. The Buddha didn't, particularly that I know of, come out and say, well, all you have to do is meditate and you won't suffer anymore. He did say cessation, but he didn't particularly say what ceased. And if he did, he probably did it expediently rather than as some kind of eternal foundation for the truth.
Shuka has another question about the deception.
Yes.
He says, how can we see that as ours?
Well, if you're actually literally asking me that question, how can we? I would say by training your mind. That's how you can see it. Because right now you're assuming, I'm assuming that you're assuming, which I get to do that you think your thoughts are your own. So that's where you start. You can't look out at somebody else and see that what you're thinking about them is a projection. And when the Buddha awoke, everywhere he looked, he saw the Buddha. He saw that nothing sleeps. Everything was awake. The consciousness is just in terms of a human presence, then the way in which it is showing up, it is being suffocated by its karma, by belief, disbelief, and ignorance. And that's what needs to be seen. You need to see the way in which you're deceiving yourself. This is what I talk to when I go into drug rehab, or people that have no interest in Buddhism particularly, but they don't like suffering. So the way I talk to them is about see the way you're deceiving yourself. You're deceiving yourself. That's how you get into the bad neighborhood of whatever, the forest of needles or bottles or patchouli baskets, whatever your problem is. We get into that and then we blame others for it, or blame our life, or blame our parents. That's a really good thing to blame, is blame your parents. I worked on that for quite a while. And we all do a little bit of that. And it's not that the parents don't have a hand in it, but they're also at the mercy of their unexamined karma and their self-deception that they think is intelligence. I'll say that again. Their self-deception that they think is how brilliant they are.
Kozan has a question.
Please.
You said to Shoto something like, take a day and don't meditate. What is meditation? Can we be sitting on the cushion and not meditating?
Did I just say that tonight?
Yes.
Take a day and don't meditate?
Yeah.
I take that back. You should keep meditating. Now, does her question still make sense?
What is meditation?
Meditation is the process of saying what is true through elimination, and soft and not demanding.
Can we be sitting on the cushion and not meditating?
Yeah, people do that all the time. Yes, Ken. It shows up, Kozan, it shows up different for everyone. Some can actually get up and say, nothing happens. I'm just sitting there. Maybe. Others say that they have cosmic experiences. Others say they're just plagued by their thought patterns, and it's just irritating to be there and thinking and thinking and thinking. Others say they're going back and forth between that. I've heard about every description there is, including the descriptions I have for meditation.
Of this talk, the ignored frontier.
Yes.
Could you describe again what that is?
Like the idea of frontier is the last frontier was supposed to be space, which is not a bad idea. And the final frontier, I guess it was. And then there's the western frontier, the leading edge of going into the wilderness or something. Of course, we didn't acknowledge there was a whole civilization of indigenous people there, so it really wasn't a frontier in the true sense of nothing being there particularly. So it's the idea of going into that area of the consciousness where you have less and less of a foothold, less and less of a guardrail, less and less of and it's more and more and more open, more breathing room, more openness at some point, until the whole idea of openness and something open and something closed, that particular duality starts to come apart. And then my experience of that was a long time ago was the dimension of depth disappeared, and there was just width and breadth, and it didn't last very long. Thank God.
Not Buddha.
Yeah, thank Buddha. Thank one of those deities. More about that.
So, in terms of our practice, what frontier then could we be ignoring?
And schedule 6.5 hours a day, and I know people aren't always doing that whole time, but they're probably doing several hours, just because if you live at the monastery, you're pretty much going to have to do some meditating, much more than you would do if you lived in St. Paul or Detroit or Philadelphia or Sudetenland, because there's a strong forum, and you've come and you've said, yes, I'll do this. And so therefore the hon and the bell rings and it's time to go. And you might be the one striking it. So at 7 o'clock, you go in and sit there for a couple of hours, do the sutras, practice, and continue to do over and over through repetition more.
Jinshu has a follow-up. As we go deeper into the open frontier, can it feel more narrow?
Yes, it might. It can feel more difficult. And it's just they're just passages. They're just narrow, but it just don't stop. Just continue to return. It's called in the Zen tradition, Suzuki Roshi in his book Beginner's Mind, just return to square one. Always starting over, always sitting down. New day, new wall, new mind, new, just completely nothing coming up from anything else. And so Domino B, I like your points of view. Thank you for it. Yes, I didn't realize they were that pointed, but you're welcome.
I don't have any other questions here. There are others that want to type in a question, perhaps. We still have a few minutes.
Yeah. Or we can close if you have questions. Domino B, I think it's Domino, says, "Are you a saint?" Of course. I look like a saint. So are you. We're all saints. We're all Buddhas. We're all transcendent beings. You just have to realize it. I'm not kidding. I don't kid much. Well, there's a few times. Yes, we're all not separate from the Buddha. Find out. Go into that frontier. You have that. If you're looking at me, you're talking to me, you have that. You can do that. Anyone listening to this message more than once, if you listen to it once and leave, then this is probably not your cup of oxalates. So do something else. There's no right and wrong. I'm not here to say everybody should listen to this old man. No, I have a couple dozen people that have been listening to me for a few years. That's enough. Just as I've said before, I don't want followers. You start following me, I'll chase you away.
Well, so far, Michael from the monastery hasn't been chased away, and he has a question.
He's not following me. Michael's not a follower. He didn't know how to follow anybody.
But tell him.
He's in that box?
Yeah.
Oh. Michael?
His question. What does it mean to do nothing?
To see how much you keep doing. If you watch the doingness, your hands moving like mine are, or you're nodding, or you're widening your eyes, or thinking, or taking pictures of cars at the car lot like you do, there's always some kind of doingness going on. Just watch that. See if something's really happening. And I'm not denying it. I'm not saying try to look for nothing happening. That's not what I'm saying. I'm trying to say whatever is happening, see how real that is. Is there someone there that's doing that? Is it happening, occurring in terms of picking up your suitcase or your blankets or your laundry or your dishes from the, in our case, from the white tower room and taking them out to, is there someone doing that? There's a doing happening, but is there someone doing it? If so, who's doing that? So this is a way you can find that out. You can do it.
Sokuzan has a question.
Yes.
He asks, how is the way we evaluate others evaluating ourselves?
So it's a subtle area. It takes some time to be able to see that. And quite often if I say that, if you, Sokuzan or anyone begins to try to start to make something of that from the point of view like this, there's the underlying assumption you have to get rid of that. And actually that's the way it starts out. That's the way not being separate from anything starts out. It starts out as showing you're starting to see, oh my gosh. You might not say my oh my gosh. You probably use some kind of a Sanskrit word or something like whatever the parivrajika, which means those who wander around. So you might see that the projection is that it shows up that way, and that's the beginning of seeing you're not separate. So you don't want to get rid of your confusion. Please don't. Confusion is included. Ego is included. Everything is included. There's nothing to get rid of, nothing to change. You don't have to be anybody else. Just be genuine. And that the genuineness, your own sincerity, your own desire, your wish to be liberated will lead you to the goal, which you will find out is not exactly what you thought the goal was. I'm glad I could help you. Don't give up. Keep going. There's a something said that has been said in the past. I'm not the only one to say this. I just think that it's worth repeating, and that is the boundary between meditation and post-meditation or your everyday life goes away. Whether you're meditating or not meditating, it's the same thing. Not separate, not separate, not separate. You could go and meditate, and it may feel good. It may feel weird. It may feel loose. It may feel sleepy. It may feel anything, but it's not separate from your everyday life anymore. Nothing is separate anymore. The teaching person is not separate from his or her students. They're not separate. Pretty weird, but not weird. It's just the truth. If you read the not only the Tibetan masters in ancient time, but the Zen and Chan masters in ancient Japan, China, Korea, they had different ways of teaching different people. The way Milarepa, Marpa the translator, who was Milarepa's teacher, had, I think it was Milarepa, had him build houses out of stone. Wasn't it Milarepa?
I think so.
I think 8 or 9 of them. As soon as he get the house all built, he'd build me a house. He'd build the house, and he said, I don't want it there. Take it apart and put it over there. And he kept doing that and doing that. So, of course, Milarepa was a difficult student. He was also a murderer, so maybe a little difficult. Needed a little extra help. And I think he even complained to other people, why do I get treated like this? Everybody else gets treated great, and I get treated like this. I had a similar experience like that with my Zen master. It wasn't quite as bad as that. I didn't have to build any houses.
We have time for maybe a final question if anyone has it.
Anyone have a final question? Let's see if there's one here. No. I think I've covered those that are on there. Final question? No?
Nothing here.
Very good. Have a good evening, and thank you for joining. And we'll be kind of isolated because of the virus situation here for a couple of weeks to kind of see what tumbles out. I'm going to be 79 next month, and so I at a little bit of risk with that kind of a virus. Anything else? Okay, good. Thank you so much. Namaste.